This is The Big Breakdown, a long look back at some of the biggest stories we're covering for you at the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.
It's very interesting. There are other elements of this case that we're going to dig into probably next week and continue to examine all of the elements surrounding Wendy, what people have said about Wendy, what people have said about her testimony, even Wendy herself. We'll probably take a look back at some of that as well as we continue to examine this and see where this all goes. Obviously, she maintains her innocence. She has never been charged with anything, so this is all allegedly. And, you know, just it's a fascinating case as we continue to dig into it. We're going to shift gears right now and talk about another crazy case that is going on. This is a case that has all the elements that make the public stop in their tracks. A missing teenager, a shocking discovery, and a celebrity's name tied to it all, if you can pronounce their name. Earlier this month, a Tesla abandoned in the Hollywood Hills was towed to a lot. 2 days later, staff noticed a foul odor. When police opened the trunk, they found the decomposed body of 15-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez, a girl who had been missing for more than a year. The Tesla was registered to singer David Anthony Burke, or D4vd, as he spells it, a rising star in the music world. His career was surging until, suddenly, it was derailed by this connection to a tragedy that is now the center of a criminal investigation. Right now, there are more questions swirling than answers. No cause of death has been released as of this recording. No one has been charged, yet the fallout is already massive for Celeste family, who are grieving. And for David, this is how he says his name, David, whose career has been effectively frozen. Today, I want to dig into the issues with someone who knows the system from both sides, defense attorney and former prosecutor Eric Faddis joining us. Eric, let's start with the obvious on this one. A body in the trunk of a car tied to a celebrity. What does a prosecutor see, and what does a defense attorney see in just that headline?
Tony, I think both of them see that this case is going to have a national presence, that there's going to be eyes on this case. And so both sides really have to ensure that they are crossing all their T's and dotting all, are crossing their T's. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Well, if you're going in the world of David, you can spell it any way you want.
Right? That's right. Letters don't matter anymore.
Cross the I's, dot the T's.
That's what something like that. But yes, certainly, anytime that there is a young woman, a minor, a child who is deceased in a car, that is going to get national or is likely to get national acclaim in some respects. So, it's going to be a big case either way. Investigation has to ensue promptly and diligently and properly on both sides. And so very high stakes. I'm sure both attorneys are looking at it from that view.
Eric, how do you go into something like this? It's your car and there's a body in the trunk. How in the hell do you defend this? I mean, I know I'm just putting a blanket statement over, just, give me what you would do. But if this lands on your desk, I mean, what's your first thought when you see a case like this? This is a tough one.
Certainly alarming. How in the world did a minor female's dead body get in your client's car? That's a tremendous question.
Right.
From the defense side, my understanding is that David may have been on tour or outside of the vicinity when the body was discovered. That doesn't mean he didn't do it, but there's they've got to tie David to being involved in however this poor girl died. And my understanding is that they pulled surveillance video from David's residence at the time in California, and they're asserting that, hey, if Celeste would have been in contact with David, she would have been on the video. So there's investigation that's going on. They're interviewing people. They're trying to learn their clients' whereabouts. They're trying to learn the time of death and cause and manner. All of those things are open questions.
Obviously, registration doesn't necessarily equal possession of the body. Prosecutors have to prove who had control when that body was placed. Does a body in your registered car automatically tie you to the murder, or is it the ownership versus possession question? Is that a legal firewall for the defense on this?
It certainly raises some eyebrows, obviously. But that being said, from defense perspective, I think that what they're going to look at is, hey, this guy was a big star. He probably had a team around him. He probably had assistants, liaisons, that kind of thing. And sometimes those folks have access to residences, to vehicles, that kind of thing. And so there may have been other people who had access to the vehicle. And I'm sure defense is exploring that now to see, hey, could it have been someone else who was involved and tried to pin this on David while he was on tour? Because that'd be a pretty common sense frame job if someone was trying to frame a person.
Right.
There's a lot of questions about what was going on here. Obviously, this girl was missing for over a year. I mean, that's quite a time. And when they found the body, from what we understand, it was in a very decomposed state. So it had been there for quite some time. So we don't know exactly how long she had been dead for and have been missing for a year, but it certainly wasn't like she died the week prior and was sitting in the trunk. That long missing window, I mean, it does seem to complicate the timeline a little bit, widens the opportunity, but also kind of hints at, if this woman who was missing was connected to David, and the mom has now said that she believes her daughter had a boyfriend named David. That's all we've heard, is just that statement. There's a lot to dig into there, or a lot of questions that we have there. Does that point us, and obviously I should say this, David, the singer here, never been charged with anything as of yet, maintains innocence. We just haven't really made any statements, but does this kind of hint at there's some sort of connection? And there's obviously concerns of grooming and things of that nature, considering she was, 14 when she disappeared.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. So the relationship makes David suspect number one, especially when her body is found in a vehicle registered to him. On top of that, like you said, you have this sort of power differential between this very wealthy and gaining popularity star, David, who is older, and I believe that he is an adult now, whereas Celeste has always been a minor throughout the whole thing, although their relationship may have started when they were both minors. That being said, David can assert some power over a person under those circumstances. He could, try to get that person to do what he wanted to. And so certainly that connection is there, but that, like you said, that time frame is a pretty big window. And unfortunately, with runaway teens and things like that, they can come in contact with other nefarious individuals. That's something both sides have to look at.
Both Celeste and David, from what we're understanding, had the same matching tattoo on the same finger. That, I think, is a piece that is making a lot of people question, okay, this seems like maybe it wasn't one of your homies. Maybe it wasn't part of your posse that had this connection with you. If you have matching tattoos going on and your body is found in the car of the guy that has the same matching tattoo, it doesn't look good. I mean, it's not to say that she couldn't have just been a crazy fan and that there was, part of the posse, part of his crew that were hanging with her and then decided to put the body in the trunk and not tell David. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities. The easy one to go to is, of course, she has the same tattoo, she's missing, and she's in the trunk of a car, and oh yeah, David has a music video where he's putting a body in the back of the car. What do you make of the tattoo connection?
One thing I think it shows is alleged power and control that David had over Celeste. Look, Celeste was a minor. My understanding is she generally cannot get a tattoo on her own. And so David was willing to sort of skirt those laws and do as he pleased in terms of making sure they had the same tattoo. They have a connection there that is permanent for lifetime unless the tattoo is removed. Now, these are all just allegations at this point, but it looks like an older man who is getting a matching tattoo with a minor, and that's a horrible look and kind of goes to power and control, at least if you're the prosecution.
I didn't think about the aspect that she was too young for a tattoo. That never even crossed my mind. That's an excellent point. You need parental permission for things like that.
Typically, yes, unless you have means and resources and influence of people who
Correct.
are willing to, do whatever because you're a star and sort of overlook some of the more seedy details potentially.
Yeah.
I mean, this, at a minimum, this girl had been missing for more than a year. Let's just take murder out of the equation for a moment here. I mean, because we don't know exactly how she died as of yet. Obviously, the body was stored. Someone didn't want it to be found. Or maybe they did because they put it in a place where eventually it would be found. But if we take that out of the equation, let's say she was hanging with this group and touring with them, and one of the groupies, essentially. I mean, there's movies about this, and it looked a lot more romantic when it was on Almost Famous, where you got the big sunglasses and this is just
That's
cute.
what I was gonna do.
But in reality, this is what it is. It's not like, oh, you're just part of the group. No, you're probably being passed around by a lot of people in this group. That whole element to this. It would be kidnapping, would it not? I mean, if they're holding and abetting a runaway, essentially, is that kidnapping? If if they're going along with you, whether or not they're, I guess, physically restraining may be the other part of this. But wouldn't there be a possibility of charges in that element alone of taking this minor with you on the road wherever you go? Take the murder out of it first.
It's an important point, and it would usually be something within the context of like harboring a juvenile who's a runaway.
Okay.
Because even if she is consensually consorting with these folks, it doesn't mean that you can just keep her from her family. There are certain laws that prohibit that kind of thing. And so right there, that's problematic. And in fact, there are some videos that I've seen that purport allegedly to show David with Celeste, like doing podcasts and stuff like that together. And so there's substantial evidence that they were together while she was a runaway. That alone is a potential legal problem for David.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen some of those videos that have popped up. I think some people have tried to debunk it. I think TMZ may have debunked one of them, but there's more than one that's out there, and there are several videos where, I mean, it's not a perfect shot, but it does look like it could be her. And considering the connection there, it's certainly not out of the question that she would be popping up on concert videos and such. If she's part of the crew at some point in time. I want to talk to about what's going on here with the body itself. Found wrapped in plastic, badly decomposed. The cause and manner of death are still very pending. Until the medical examiner rules, there's no homicide charge that's going to stick. Prosecutors are basically handcuffed until the medical examiner actually speaks. Why is that ruling so critical before charges can even be considered here?
It's critical based on the medical examiner's role. So that role in part includes determining the cause of death and the manner of death. Manner of death can be accident, it can be suicide, it can be homicide. Cause of death can be corroborative of that manner. And so before you bring a murder case, you want to know how the person died, because if you're not able to establish that predicate fact from the outset, it gives defense all of these outs to say, hey, we have no idea that she was even murdered. She could have, fallen off out of a window or something, and then people tried to cover it up. Or there's tons of concoctions that can happen on the defense side when you don't have a firmly established cause and manner of death, and you get that from a medical examiner.
How important is digital evidence going to be in this case?
I think it's going to be substantial. We talked about possible alleged videos showing them together. There's no that has not been conclusively determined, but also that there's evidence in David's art, according to some, that seem to reference Celeste. And then on top of that, in this digital age, especially with minors, they're constantly using their devices to communicate, to make plans, to talk about problems. All of those things are going to come up, and I imagine the government, if they haven't already, are drafting search warrants for those digital devices as we speak.
They have. The LAPD has seized a computer and other items from a home that was tied to David's manager where he was staying. I find that interesting, the word staying. Like, I don't know that David had a place. I don't know if David was homeless, technically. I mean, like, he's a singer, but he's pretty new. I don't know that he was super rich or anything yet. But, he's going around, he's making his music. He's very new in this world, but they did seize that. You're looking at that. Another interesting aspect to this, because I went down the rabbit hole a little bit yesterday on this case and started looking at the Reddits and started looking at the Discords and all that for this. What I have gleaned off of looking into all of that, there appears to have been, again, all alleged, accounts they believe were David's, that were interacting with the group on the Reddits, on the Discords, and things of that nature, that now have suddenly gone back and deleted a lot of information. Areas where they're talking about Celeste, things that may look like there's a connection. I don't want to necessarily say anything, criminal. There wasn't anything where, like, I'm going to kill her, but any semblance of connection, I would say, I guess, to her there seems to be an attempt of it being scrubbed from these boards as of right now, which were just fan discussion at one point in time. Now you have death involved here. That doesn't look good if you are the man I guess you could look at it both ways. One could say if you had nothing to do with it, you certainly don't want to make it look like you had anything more to do with it if you really didn't. So you'd have some interest in deleting that stuff. But at the same point, going and deleting that stuff, it certainly makes you look like you're trying to hide something.
Oh, without question, from the prosecutor's perspective, they're going to look at that deleted material. That's likely destruction of evidence. Usually that's a felony. And so they're going to try to link up IP addresses, locations, user accounts, that kind of thing to identify who did the deletion. And then if it's David, that's obviously shows consciousness of guilt and that he's trying to hide something. If it's one of his associates, perhaps they attempt to go after that person criminally, turn that person into a government witness against David. Now, if you're on the criminal defense side, perhaps there's an argument that, hey, he's this highly publicized, big deal. He had this promising career coming along. There's this dead girl with which he had nothing to do. We need to do some PR optics work here to try to distance him from that, which isn't the same as saying he committed the crime.
No, it's not at all. The optics are important. I always, I feel like nothing's ever really truly just a coincidence. You have someone here who has matching tattoos with a victim that's in his trunk. You have the body in the trunk of the car. You have a music video where he's putting a body in the trunk of the car and depicting death and murder. And there's also lyrics referencing Celeste, allegedly, out there as well. This doesn't look good. I don't know how you piece around. I don't know how if you are defending David, and we're certainly not even anywhere near that yet, considering there's been no charges made as of yet. I would imagine there would be at some point in time, unless something clear comes out of this. All those pieces on the surface, that's going to make pretty much everybody go, you had something to do with this person's death, would it not?
Tony, let me throw something out there, and Eric, tell me if I'm absolutely bonkers here, but could there be somebody in his circle that is so envious or jealous, and this is just the perfect setup?
Yeah.
Oh, totally. I think both of those are important points. So one, and of course, are very suspicious circumstances here that seem to implicate David. On the other hand, like I was sort of alluding to, if there was someone else who was the culprit, who perhaps could have even been in this circle, these are all just allegations at this point, and they wanted, they became obsessed or they became involved with a minor and something bad happened. Maybe it was a drug overdose, maybe it was something else, and they said, gosh, I got to cover this up, and I got to get myself out of the crosshairs of the law. One way to do that is to pin it on or put the body in the vehicle of somebody else and say, oh, look, it was actually this David guy who has this tattoo and he's written a song about her allegedly.
Yeah.
So there are some ways to kind of look at it where could it have been a frame job? All of these things are, I'm sure, being investigated by defense.
And it wouldn't be a far stretch for that to happen by any means. I mean, if you are envious of him, if you have some sort of issue, whatever it may be, well, he's pretty much set it up. He's very, very performance art based. If anybody has looked at any of his work and things like that, it's very cryptic. It's very mysterious. It's not just like in your face, rap or anything like that. In fact, he's more R&B than he is rap. But it's very art-based. It really is. And if you were to be on the inside of this circle, you know what's coming out down the road. You really could frame this to make it, I guess, the most morbid, horrible art piece where an actual person is dead in his trunk after he has the music video that portrays it and all of that. I guess right now, this early into an investigation where everybody is certainly looking at David, should we be looking closer, or should the investigators be really focusing more so on the circle around him than David himself, or put some extra resources where you may not think to, because this could be a great time for somebody to slip away into the night as well.
Oh, totally. And what we have, Tony, is we have this. David was very young. I think he's like 20 now or so. Yeah. And so he's this young star. He's gaining popularity. He's gaining a lot of money. He's doing these nationwide tours. You're going to come in contact with some vultures. You might come in contact with some folks who are unsavory people who are just looking to capitalize on their own interests. And so, could those folks have some sort of nefarious involvement that doesn't involve David? Perhaps David, his team might argue, was involved in sex, drugs, rock and roll, and maybe he had an inappropriate relationship. But that doesn't rule out other potential culprits who could have been involved in Celeste's death. And I think prosecution is going to have to do a good job of ruling that out. Otherwise, there's going to be alternative suspects all over the place.
Do we know if he's right now? We haven't heard a whole lot about what's going on with him in this investigation, other than they've seized some property. Do we know if he's cooperating with investigators or anything of that nature? Obviously, he's not charged, so he's a free man as of this recording.
I've got to imagine at this juncture, law enforcement has reached out to him and asked him for an interview. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that, I think it's likely he's probably lawyered up at this point. I haven't read any reports showing such an interview. That would be really the metric by which we would determine whether he is cooperating or not. And perhaps I've just missed those reports. But I'm not aware of any sort of like sit down, in-depth interrogation of David. And the fact that hasn't come to light leads me to believe that there could be some measures on David's behalf to try and protect him legally, such as not agreeing to an interview, although I don't have any conclusive information one way or the other.
I mean, that could be dangerous to go and do an interview right now, even if you do have nothing to do with this, because the evidence is very much pointing one way. And if they want to put him in a box, if he did not do this, it would be fairly easy to do at this moment in time if you have a very zealous prosecutor, and rightfully so, to try and get information. But if he's innocent, we just don't know enough yet. We have no cause of death as of this moment, no suspect name, no charges filed. Could they be waiting for the medical examiner's information? And in something like this, where the body is in a trunk and decomposed and really in a bad state, how long could that be until we get some information here? And I wonder if we could very well easily get an inconclusive cause of death, unless there's like a bullet to her head, which we don't know. You could just have a rotting body and no real understanding of how that person died. How long do you expect to wait before we hear some sort of charge is filed against someone in this sphere?
In autopsies that are clear cut, it can take a matter of days. On ones that are more complicated, there's decomposition. There aren't any witnesses to how she died. It can take weeks or months. We look at the Barry Morphew case out of Colorado, where I practice, and they found the body of Suzanne Morphew, but it took a long, long time before they were able to issue a report, and they only were able to do so because of a toxicology analysis of her remains. Here, if Celeste God forbid, had some kind of toxicology result, that only makes it more difficult for the prosecution, because defense can say, hey, there was other stuff going on in her life, and I have no indication that would be the result. But I'm just talking hypothetically about how these sometimes play out. Could be weeks or months before we get a medical examiner report, and that report might not shed a whole bunch of light on what happened.
I would imagine nobody in their right mind thinks that putting a body in your trunk is going to then abandon a vehicle is not going to lead to some sort of charges against you. But I guess that's the question: was he that stupid if he did this? I mean, he's 20. Everybody's young and dumb at some point in life, and the weird one you can go with, this is a really morbid art piece and he's ready to go away to prison and this is just part of it. The other is the framing end of it. It would be insanely stupid. It is an insanely stupid move of what they did, because it wasn't like the car was just parked overnight. It was there. It was towed because it had been abandoned. So that being said, it feels like somebody wanted this car eventually to be found with the body in it that was connected to him. That was either David, who is basically saying, come get me, or it's somebody that wants someone to go get David. I feel like it's one of two things. It doesn't feel like this body was sitting there and, well, we're going to transport it, we're going to bury it someplace else. It seems more like, well, this is the resting spot. We'll see what happens when they impound the car.
It's a critical point, because sometimes when evidence comes out, it can be so convenient for the prosecution. It's too convenient that the killer would butcher a 15-year-old and just leave her in the car to be found in a public area. It's not like the car was in the woods or something, or lit on fire. It was sort of like, hey, when you guys find it, here's what I did. So I think that's how the defense is going to look at it. Prosecution might say, hey, look, he's 20 years old. He thinks he's untouchable. He thinks he's above the law and could do whatever he wants. He went on tour and thought this would just maybe go away, and 20-year-olds make dumb decisions. But of those two arguments, one seems more realistic than the other. Yeah.
And when your publicity shots look like this, they don't look very good. This is not AI. This is one of his own official publicity shots from the music video. That's we didn't make that to, accentuate the case or anything. That's from David. There's a lot of questions. Hopefully we have more answers maybe next week. Let's move over to the Gilgo Beach murders. One of the cases that never was leaving the public's imagination, and also sets 11 sets of remains found along Ocean Parkway, families waiting years for answers, and a suspect who seemed to live in plain sight. Rex Hewerman, Long Island architect, now stands accused of killing 7 women between 1993 and 2011. This week, the judge ruled that all 7 charges will be tied together, a decision that could shape the entire outcome of the case. Eric Faddis, obviously, you are here to help us break this down. That ruling that they made this week, for more than a year, the defense fought to sever that sprawling case into several different cases, arguing each murder was too different to be lumped together. But the judge, Timothy Mazie, ruled that the murders are inextricably interwoven, and prosecutors will get to present them as one long pattern instead of 7 small battles. There's now one giant war. It's more than a technicality. It changes how jurors will experience the case. They won't see a collection of isolated deaths. They'll hear the state's theory of a single predator operating across decades and a pattern of behavior. What is this ruling? How does this reshape the entire trial before a jury is even seated, before we even have a court date, really?
I think it's a huge ruling, and I think it's going to be really problematic for the defense because, when a jury hears about one alleged murder, they're already getting shivers. I mean, it's already an uncomfortable situation to be in, and you start looking sideways at the accused. Did he do it? Could he have done this? But when you hear about multiple alleged murders with a lot of similarities between them, you look at the type of alleged victim. They were all sex workers. You look at the locale. well. Most of them were located within a specific locale, their bodies. There are overlap in terms of the evidence among the murders, including vehicles used and including DNA evidence as well. And so, as defense, it's hard to say, hey, my guy didn't do any of these multiple murders. It's just a huge conspiracy. Well, why, person being charged with like 11 murders or so automatically has a huge disadvantage on the defense side, way harder than defending a single murder.
Because at the end of the day, in this case, it's not an all or nothing verdict that's going to come in. They're going to look at all of these charges, are they not, for each individual crime? The jury, correct me if I'm wrong, they could in theory come back and say, well, we think you're guilty of this one, and this one, but not that one, this one, and the one over here.
Oh, they absolutely could. And that'll be the jury's responsibility. They will have to determine each individual charge. And I bet defense is going to request a limiting instruction, which is where the judge says to the jury, hey, if you find evidence of murder one, that the number one count, that doesn't mean you can use that evidence in and of itself to convict him of the second count of murder. However, jurors are human beings, and I think they're going to look at this in a more holistic fashion, which is a problem for the defense, but could give the defense some kind of out on appeal should there be a conviction.
Jurors are human beings, and so are the victims here, obviously, in this. Unfortunately, our society doesn't feel that way half the time about sex workers. And clearly, whoever killed these people did not look at them as human beings as well. Is this... I totally understand the argument of this could easily get a conviction and weigh it stronger for the prosecution, but does it denigrate or lessen the value of the lives of these victims by lumping them all into one big pile of sex workers?
It's an important question because you got to look at this from the perspective of the victims' families. If you have one trial where they're trying to convict somebody of killing your loved one, that's sort of center stage. Your loved one's memory is going to be center stage as well. But when you have multiple alleged victims, there's a concern that things can kind of get lost in this murky murder soup, which is a horrible thing to think about. But, and also, does the prosecution spend more time on perhaps the stronger charges and perhaps kind of call in the less stronger charges? You have that concern when there is a trial that involves so many alleged acts over the course of the better part of 2 decades.
And I want to stress this because the similarities in these victims' deaths were not all identical. And that's where I was a little, I don't want to say surprised, but I just didn't know where it was going to go with the judge's decision this week. The defense argued that the cases had nothing in common. The first victim from 1993, stabbed, others strangled, some dismembered, some wrapped in burlap. And obviously we know the burlap ones had hairs of the Hewerman family on them, pretty much all of them. And the timeline stretched almost 20 years. I mean, their position was that there was no true signature, and putting them together would unfairly prejudice a jury. They even floated 5 separate trials to keep things more isolated. Obviously, they lost that motion. Again, I do think, in my opinion, I think Rex has a lot to do with this, but again, I'm looking at this going, are they jumping the gun on trying to connect all this stuff, and will it backfire in the end? Because I feel like the defense, in some ways, this gave the defense some pretty strong arguments of the differences in all of these cases. And they better have pretty strong evidence on each and every single one of these murders that ties it to Rex, not just some collective, well, it looks like kind of could have. I mean, the hairs on the burlap ones are certain, but I don't know about the others. Are they tying some of these in here to stronger pieces because it will make that case stronger rather than being tried on its own?
100%. I think that's absolutely the approach the prosecution is taking. And you're right, it gives rise to this concern that when the jury's looking at this case back in the deliberation room and they're saying, hey, I think there's enough evidence beyond a reasonable doubt of the first murder and the second murder. I'm not so sure, but let's err on the side of caution and convict him of that anyway. Well, that presents a tremendous fairness issue. It presents a tremendous due process issue, and significant appellate issues as well. So you got to be careful of overplaying your hand. Yes, Stacey.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
but isn't there
please.
a bit of public pressure that they want him to be guilty of all of these? So if he's guilty of one, we kind of need to blanket it, because if we don't, there's another serial killer out there who could still be loose. Isn't this more for public pressure?
It's a critical point, and it's something, if I was defense counsel, I'd be arguing during closing, saying that, hey, look, the government has all of these dead bodies and they can't solve those cases.
Right.
But here we have this scapegoat, and we think they think they can tie him to a handful of misdeeds, and so let's add on all of our unsolved stuff to make us look like heroes and say, hey, we got the guy, we got him, and we solved all these murders from decades ago, when really they better come with the evidence if they're going to take that approach, because simply insinuation does give rise to the specter that they're just trying to get some homicide cases off their desk and sort of look like the hero.
That's what it feels like, honestly. And in no way am I trying to downplay Rex Heuermann. I think he's certainly tied to some of these without a doubt. And if you were just to look at some of the others and go, yeah, I mean, that's a probability. But then you also take into account the sheer population in that area of the country, New York, Long Island, all that. You have more people condensed in one little spot than most any other place in the United States. You have a lot of people, a lot of death, a lot of murder around there just because of having that many people there. And it's not uncommon that there are deaths and murders on that seedy side of the world. People don't like BS. People don't like being lied to. People don't like cops trying to spin a story to fit their narrative, which we've already seen in this, or I guess lack of action in this case for quite some time, why it took forever to actually get to a conviction in this case, or a charge in this case. I'm looking at this and I'm feeling like they're going about this the wrong way. I feel like you could very easily get a jury, because you could just as easily get a jury in this that's going to go, we think you're stretching the limits over here quite a bit, so why should we believe anything you're saying over here?
Oh, totally. So the prosecution's credibility is super important with this jury. If they overextend, if they overplay their hand, like you said, it could call into question how a jury sees the reliability of the rest of their evidence. And if I'm defense counsel, perhaps I'm arguing something like, this case is about overkill, but it's not my client's overkill. It's the government who is trying to pin on the scapegoat all of these additional charges that they couldn't solve otherwise. And if you can't, place any faith in those accusations, how much faith can you really place in what the government sees as some more solid accusations?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Look, he's guilty. In my opinion, he's guilty of several of these. Is he guilty of all of them? We don't know. But there are several other cases that they have not tied to him yet that are just sitting out there kind of in speculation. Will they add this? Won't they add this? And may end up being tied to this at the end of the day. But it seems like a very tightrope that they have to be walking on right now, especially as this leads up to trial too. We still don't have a trial date. We don't even know when this trial will take place. Estimate, in your opinion, what would you think? Next year at some point? Or, could this play out for several more years with the possibility of them throwing more victims onto this?
I'm hopeful that we'll reach some kind of finality in 2026. That being said, one single murder case can be pushed out for months, if not years. We're talking multiple murder cases all combined into one. And on top of that, if they add charges, if they add alleged victims, that can start the whole thing over again, because the defense has to investigate a brand new murder case. And so we might not see any resolution for these victims' families and for Rex until 2027 or possibly beyond.
So what is the definition of a speedy trial then? Because not that I'm defending Rex Heuermann, but how long can somebody remain behind bars without their trial taking place?
It's a very important question. It comes up a lot, Stacey. So typically there is what's called a statutory right to speedy trial, which is in the state's law, and then there's a constitutional right to speedy trial. Statutory right to speedy trial is usually something like 6 months, but there are exceptions, and sometimes the defense agrees to waive it. In fact, commonly the defense would agree to waive their statutory right to speedy trial to do additional investigation, get prepared for trial. The constitutional one is much more vague and unclear. It's kind of like within a reasonable amount of time, and you look at other cases and say, hey, it's been longer than this case, but less long than this case. Does that result in a constitutional violation? So certainly that could come into play as we approach 2026. And if it goes longer than that, certainly we're having concerns about speedy trial at that point. But there's usually not a great black and white rule for that, except on the statutory side, which has a ton of exceptions.
Gotcha. Thank you.
On the tightrope that they're walking here, the forensics are on the front line here. The DNA, that sequencing and the process that they're using is unlike anything most jurors have seen. Investigators used whole genome sequencing. Of course, we all know what that is, right? It's a first in New York murder trials. It is a reliable science. It's just a new science. And when anything is new, people are going to have questions. To match degraded hairs from multiple victims to Heuermann. They also say they found female hairs belonging to his wife on some of the victims, even though she was out of town at the time of the murder, suggesting transfer from basically the Heuermann household. And Heuermann, Rex, from the house to Rex to the bodies to the burlap sacks. The defense calls it magic science. And obviously it's not magic science. It's creative use of words. They're trying to make it sound like this is junk science. It's from an out-of-state lab that shouldn't be trusted. That's the narrative. The judge ruled it to be admissible, but it is new. The evidence is going to be a big fulcrum of this entire case. And again, it's a tightrope. You're combining all these cases into one. You're using a new type of technology that hasn't been used in a New York court case before. Is that going to present some issues? How receptive are juries to hearing evidence from, a new way of examining DNA? It's already confusing as it is.
It very much is. Jurors often look at experts, at least initially, as having significant authority in that field. Just being deemed an expert by the judge and being allowed to testify at trial, there's some credibility that might be imputed because of that from the jury to the expert. That being said, certainly defense is going to find some expert in DNA sciences who says, hey, this is too new, it's not reliable, you can't bet on it and hang your hat on it for convicting a person of murder. And they'll find an expert who will say that. I very much anticipate. So it's going to be a battle in there, and the prosecution is going to have to do a good job of explaining exactly what this is and why it should be reliable, and especially based on how new it is.
Well, and obviously every technology has its first day in court. This will be the first time, supposedly, in New York for this to be tested out. Could this trial set precedent for future cases and how advanced DNA is used in future prosecutions nationwide, especially if they do get a conviction on it, saying it worked over here, let's use it more over here?
100%. It could have a cascading effect throughout the country in that fashion, because one of the main factors that a court looks at in deciding whether to allow expert testimony is, hey, did another judge do it? Did they think it was good enough? Did they think it was sufficient? And if so, well, I feel reasonably comfortable with admitting such evidence in my case as the judge. And so, it's definitely going to have a significant effect. I think this is going to be used in jurisdictions across the country, assuming it's successful. If it's not successful, or if it is severely weakened during trial, I think law enforcement's going to have to take a second look at that.
We know that Asa Elrup from his wife, or ex-wife now, but from what we understand in the documentary that we recently watched, they got divorced more so for financial reasons, to protect assets and things of that nature. Okay, great, that happens all the time. But you're no longer married to him. Is there spousal rights here when this comes to testifying, when this comes to being interviewed by police, when it comes to any of that. There's certainly plead the fifth type motions, but what sort of protections does Asa have going forward in this now that they are no longer married?
If she had any involvement, which I'm not saying she did at all,
No.
but if she did, one protection is the Fifth Amendment, the right against self-incrimination and the privilege to not incriminate oneself at trial. But when it comes to spousal privilege, that gets more murky, especially when the union has dissolved. So Rex Heuermann likely will not be able to raise some kind of spousal privilege argument to prevent her from testifying entirely. It usually applies to communications that are supposed to be confidential with your spouse. And the idea behind it is that we don't want to break up families by having one spouse testify against the other at trial. Well, families are already broken up. So that policy and the rationale behind the privilege doesn't really apply to this upcoming trial.
And she doesn't seem to be that she'd be opposing witness for Rex. I wonder if, could she be called by the defense to help back up Rex and being the good old family man that he is, according to her in the documentary?
Yes. So in this context, if there is any spousal privilege under state law, it would rest with Rex, and he could always waive that privilege and call to his wife to testify. And she likely wouldn't have like her own privilege to assert. It would be the defendant who could assert it or not. So if she's going to give favorable testimony, certainly defense could call her, and they might do so in sort of an unexpected way. Perhaps they sort of posture as if, hey, you're not going to hear from the wife, whatever, and then she's the surprise witness who does some who scores some points for the defense. That's happened before. Judging
by what we saw in that documentary, do you think she would be an effective witness for him?
Certainly she could have some favorable things to say about him. That being said, on cross-examination, the prosecutor is going to talk about that residence, and they're going to talk about what was found in there, and they're going to talk about, you mean to tell me that he never told you about the, over a dozen times that he was allegedly engaged in criminal activity? You had no clue whatsoever. They could really try to impugn her credibility up there. And so it could be a big risk calling her for the defense.
Well, and she also appears a little bit like a victim. Well, a lot like a victim, and to find all this sexually deviant stuff in the house, which, if you've got some kinks, that's your deal. Fine. But we're looking at murder investigation here. And some of the things that were found, how did she not know about this?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a big question, a line of questioning from the prosecutor if she testifies. Because, look, I mean, most people know their spouses reasonably well. Certainly some secrets can be hidden. But there was a lot that was taken from that house. There's a good amount of digital material as well. So it could make her look pretty bad. And also could, if she did have some knowledge and had some kind of involvement, which I'm not saying she did, but if she did, and if that comes out in trial, she could be in hot water too. So there's a lot of risks that abound with calling a spousal witness like that.
We just saw the Adelson trial, and obviously we saw one of the Adelson children who lives in upstate New York testify basically against mom, against Donna. When we saw in that documentary about Heuermann recently was the daughter, and she didn't flat out say she thinks he did it, but she seems to be kind of coming to terms with the idea that he probably did do it. And that's my conjecture on it. I think most people got that out of the documentary, that she's kind of coming there and mom's not seeing it at all. Asa's not seeing it. What could happen here with the daughter? Could the daughter end up testifying? Could she be compelled to testify? Could she plead the fifth? I mean, could they go back and play the clips from the documentary where she's basically incriminating her father?
Yes. So the way that they would do it, she does not have any sort of daughter-parent privilege. There's no such thing exists.
Sure.
She likely doesn't have a Fifth Amendment privilege unless she had some kind of involvement, which there's no indication she did. And so what happens is they would call her, and as a witness, the prosecution would say, hey, did you ever say this about your dad? And she can either admit to it on the stand and say, yeah, I said that something that sounds incriminating. Or she could say, no, I never said that. And they'll say, hey, let's go to the tape. We saw that in the Karen Reed case a lot in sort of a little different fashion, but
Sure.
Those clips can be central to either side's case, and here more likely the prosecution.
Yeah, and I would imagine there's a treasure trove of that information. Do you think? I mean, that's just what we saw on the finished product of the documentary. As we saw in the Karen Reed case, there's a lot on the cutting room floor. I mean, could they subpoena that sort of information from the media entity, the G Unit Productions 50 Cents group that made the doc?
They certainly can subpoena it. Now, sometimes there are protections that arise for media outlets, but usually those protections just prevent calling the specific reporters as witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
There are ways to sidestep those, including subpoenaing materials, content, films, that kind of thing, to which such a privilege usually doesn't apply. So I don't think the defense is going to be shielded by any of those sort of media protections here. And the cutting room floor stuff is sometimes where the gold is at.
I bet there is. I bet it is. It's like Scrooge McDuck's gold room where he dives in at the beginning of DuckTales. You know what we're all talking about? DuckTales. Woo! There we go. Got a little DuckTales in. I would imagine there's a lot of it there. One more question. How the hell do you get an impartial jury on this one? I mean, where do you move this thing to? Because it's New York, it's Long Island. Everybody in this general vicinity with all of these people know about this case and know it well. It's been a trauma, I would say, to the population as a whole for many people for decades. What do you do?
Oh, totally. It's a huge quagmire for defense because so many reasons. So many people know about these allegations in New York against Rex Heuermann, tying him to multiple alleged murders. That's a huge problem. On top of that, like you said, the communities themselves have likely been impacted by these series of events, these sex workers who go missing, these bodies that are found within their communities, that they can be scared. Perhaps they have relatives who might have engaged in sex work at some point in their lives. And all of those personal connections to this case can really make it difficult for the defense to get a fair shake once we get to the trial phase. And so those will certainly be arguments if there's a conviction that'll be raised on appeal. But, do you send it to upstate New York and hope it's rural and detached enough? Even then, I'm not sure you're in a great spot.
I don't know how you get around that in this one. That's going to be very and and if you have jurors that have no clue what the hell's going on with this, do you want them as jurors?
Right.
Like to be that disconnected from where? Do they have it like in an Amish community or something in upstate New York?
I was wondering if they would try, defense would try to move it to somewhere like that. I've never seen that, but a creative idea.
Yeah. The Quakers will decide the future of Rex Heuermann. It's a fascinating case. Eric Faddis, defense attorney, as always, thank you so much for coming on and giving us your insight into these cases. Always so much appreciated. That's going to wrap up today's episode of Hidden Killers Live. Tomorrow, we're going to dive into probably more in the David case. We're going to take a look at some of the videos, some of those pieces of evidence that exist, or just pieces of media, pieces of his art, pieces of his work that look pretty damn incriminating. We'll take a look at that. Plus, we're going to also dive into newly released footage of the surviving roommates in the Brian Kohberger Idaho 4 murder case. Their testimony, what they had said to police immediately after the killings took place. We're going to dissect some of that and dig into it. And let me say this, in no way are we looking at them as any sort of guilt or suspect, or because there's people out there that do that shit. We're not doing it. We're just going to take a look at those the questions that were asked and what was the mindset. And really, I think we're going to examine the psychological end of it, the trauma that going through something like this implants into young minds that have to endure it. So that'll be tomorrow, 10 a.m. Central on our YouTube channel, Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. Search it. Press subscribe if you're there right now so you don't miss any of that. And be sure to let us know what your thoughts are on this case and all the cases we've talked about in the comment section on the video. Until next time, for Eric, for Stacy, for Todd, I'm Tony Bruschi. We will talk again real soon.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Bruschi and the Hidden Killers podcast.